You know, at first I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this. Then I thought maybe I should talk about this. Then I realized I need to talk about this. Because, as you've probably heard, there's a Green Lantern series out right now. There are a few Green Lantern series out right now, but there's one in particular that is noteworthy for a completely different reason, and it's unfortunate because it happens to be about my favorite Green Lantern. And if you've been watching my channel for any amount of time, you probably know that I have a little bit of a thing for Alan Scott. Just a little bit of a thing. In fact, when I was in college, I went out of my way to find a t-shirt that had a design with him on it just so that I could wear it. And then when the shirt stopped fitting, I cut out the design and put it on the back of this jacket. See? So of course you might imagine that I would be very excited for this series, and when it was first announced, I was, until I found out what the premise was supposed to be about, and it was exploring, the difficulties of his homosexuality in the 40s. I've spent so long with the secret hope that Alan Scott would at some point actually get his own series again, but I knew it was always just a pipe dream because the character just wasn't popular anymore. Until they made him gay, and then all of a sudden, now he's supposed to be some sort of media darling. I'm sorry to harp on it, but I really don't like the change, and considering that's pretty much all that this series is about, we're going to get into exactly that, and I'm going to try to go through this briskly just for the sake of my own sanity. And on this first page covering the Green Lantern's exploits, we see that the reporter who wrote the article was actually Scoop Scanlan, who, in case you didn't know, was a reporter character who also appeared in Action Comics #1 in 1938. The first issue starts out with the scene with Green Lantern in the office of actually homosexual J. Edgar Hoover at FBI headquarters, and Miss Thing is upset because Green Lantern has been out fighting crime by himself when he's supposed to be out there fighting crime with the Justice Society of America because he's a member, so they need him actually in the pictures fighting crime with the entire team, but he refuses to kind of work with them. He really just joined the team in an honorary type of thing. He said he agreed to let him put his name on the masthead, so he doesn't really consider himself much of a member. Just in case anyone's curious, the original reason why he was a member of the JSA is because the original members of the JSA were just the characters who didn't have an ongoing series at the time, so that was where they had the opportunity to still have stories being told for these characters without them having to be dedicated to an ongoing title. But then Hoover ends up revealing to him that he knows his secret identity now, and when Alan tries to deny it, he tells him, look, don't play games with me. I already know exactly who you are. I have sworn affidavits from people and some personal acquaintances. When the FBI starts questioning your hookups, that's when you know you're in pretty deep. But he also reveals to him that he's read something about a Project Crimson that he worked on when he was still in the army, and he also gives him back his private journal that he used to keep, telling him that he's made copies of it and that he's willing to make sure that all of the contents are kept secret just as long as he's willing to cooperate better and work with the JSA and be part of, the photo ops and everything. Then as he's leaving, he decides to throw in this creepy shit where he's saying, we're having a little get-together in Forest Hills this weekend. You'll come. Clyde will give you the details on your way out. And Alan, bring the combat boots. If they still fit, showing the picture of Alan when he was younger in the army wearing his combat boots and not much else. And just the sheer thought of J. Edgar Hoover hitting on me in FBI headquarters was enough to make me want to light myself on fire. But I was able to keep going. And that leads into the first flashback from Alan's army days, and this actually introduces us to his love interest, who is Johnny Ladd. And the internal monologue captions are actually from his journal. Back in the day, it's basically his thoughts as everything was unfolding during the time. And what we see is that Alan's main problem with the relationship is that he feels like what he's doing is a sin. And Alan is conflicted because he knows that religiously and socially what they're doing is not acceptable. And this leaves him with a lot of doubts about their future, but Johnny is able to convince him that everything's going to be okay. And this is where we're first introduced to something that will become more important later down the line, which is Johnny's ring. It's his college baseball championship ring, and it's very special to him for very obvious reasons. But the journal entry starts talking about what the mission was at this time when Alan was there working as part of the Army Corps of Engineers, because they were here looking for the Crimson Flame. And the reason they're looking for it is because, of course, the US government sees potential of any substance that would be able to power a flame for centuries. And right before it cuts back to the present, we see a moment where Johnny goes up to Alan and gives him his ring, and right as Alan's trying to take it off because he's telling him that that's a little bit too public of a show of affection, he tells him to shut up because they actually have an encounter where they come face to face with the Crimson Flame. And that's when we see that Alan Scott is actually standing in his living room, I guess, or his study, talking to Doiby Dickles, although he calls him Derby here, but with the way that Doiby talks, it's pronounced Doiby. Doiby freaks out when he finds out that Alan was actually talking to J. Edgar Hoover and is telling him, if all he wants is for you to just fight with the JSA, why don't you just fight with them and be done with it? But he's telling him, I definitely can't do that because you have to remember that I'm actually a criminal because of the whole gay thing again, so that's why he doesn't want to fight with the Justice Society, because he feels guilty knowing that he's actually a criminal because of the things that he does with men in his spare time. But all of a sudden they hear the police rolling by with their sirens blasting, and that prompts Alan to turn to Doiby and tell him to turn on the radio. But Alan, Mr. Sister, what is going on with this pose? My God. But that's when we can see that he's taking off the ring that he got from Johnny and is switching over to his Green Lantern ring to manifest his suit. Once the radio is switched on, we can see the news report saying that there's a gunman who's reportedly holding a bunch of innocent hostages at the bank, and they're also reporting that the Green Lantern is already on the scene, even though he's actually not there yet. And this is one thing that I kind of wanted to point out. It's a very minor gripe, but it is something that I noticed and it bothered me. But then I kind of got over it a little bit. The boots. In this scene, we see that his boots are black, but if you know his costume, the boots are supposed to be red. So I'm not sure why we're going with this switch to black. It bothered me at first, but after a while I kind of got used to it. It grew on me a little bit because it does match with the cape, I guess. So it just bothered me when I saw it at first. I was like, wait a minute, why are his boots black? That's not the way that this is supposed to go, damn it. And it's possible that they've been doing the boots black for a while and I just haven't been paying attention, but when I noticed it here, it was hard to ignore it. But that's when we go back to the flashback where we can see that they're getting ready to start their grand experiment to see if they can harness the Crimson Flame, but Johnny sees that Alan dropped the ring or whatever, so he finds it for him. Alan freaks out because he didn't realize that he had lost it or whatever, but he's like, don't worry, it's fine. It's not a big deal. Now do you want to go and do something impossible? So they take off to go do that. And once they power up the machine, they see that it does actually start to fill up with the Crimson Flame, so they're kind of patting themselves on the back a little bit because it does appear that it's working, but then they see that it's actually working a little too well because the Crimson Flame isn't just some benign force, it's actually intelligent. So once they wake it up, it starts to manifest to a much larger degree than they had initially anticipated. Coming back to the present day, we're seeing where Green Lantern shows up to the bank and the cop is welcoming him back, but he's saying that he was gone for a few hours, so he didn't think that anyone was going to notice. He's asking, what's the situation? He tells them that the hostages are safe and free thanks to him, and is telling them that they have a few loose ends they need to tie up, and one of the things that they need first is the suspect. So Green Lantern's confused about that, asking him, what about the suspect? He says, look, we really appreciate your help and everything, but without a suspect, we can't really close out the file with what happened here, so we need to know, what did you do with him? Which confuses Green Lantern even more. He's saying, dude, I just got here. What do you mean? And they're kind of going back and forth about all of this when all of a sudden something starts to appear in the sky and everybody starts making a run for it. And this is where it kind of starts to go back and forth between the flashback and the present day, where we're seeing there's a situation where the Crimson Flame is starting to take the ship down. So Alan and Johnny are trying to save some of the other people who are on board. And at the same time, there's this situation now where Green Lantern is having to go and deal with this, whatever it is that's coming right at them. Back in the past, they're trying to figure out a way to get off the ship and escape, but Alan says he actually has a better idea. And then in the present, we see where Green Lantern is flying towards the fireball and manages to dissipate it, and he notices that there is actually this man lying on a roof behind him wearing only shorts and combat boots. So I think you can see where this is going. But in the past, this idea that he has for the ship to try to dump the contained plasma out the port bulkhead and hoping that the force that it produces will be enough to kind of push the ship back the right way. Johnny tries to dissuade him from that idea because they've spent so much time trying to get the Crimson Flame, but he tells him, you know what, this is our best chance to try and get out of this and save ourselves, so it's what we just have to do for now. And he does manage to do it. It does actually right the ship, so they're celebrating for a moment, but he does mention that the thing is still out there, and he's thinking maybe they're close enough to still try and capture a sample of it so that way they have something to study. But right at that moment, we see where the Crimson Flame actually comes back and grabs Johnny. Coming back to the present, we see where Green Lantern is bringing down the man who was found on top of the roof, and he actually encounters the Flash. And he starts asking him where he found the man, but when he tells him on the roof, he asks him if he's sure. He says, of course I'm sure, and he's asking him why. He says, well, the way that he has that froth around the mouth and nostrils, I'm not an expert, but I do think that this man was drowned. And he also notices that he has second-degree burns on his forearm. So he's asking him, how do you drown and burn at the same time? Which, of course, kind of shocks the Lantern because he remembers seeing this before. And then he finally looks down and realizes that he knows who the man is, which shows us one final flash of the flashback where Johnny was starting to be dragged away by the Crimson Flame. And, of course, Alan tries to stop him, but he's not able to reach him, and he gets whipped back as the rest of the soldiers have to kind of hold Alan down. And that's when we see that he's actually kind of having this very long extended memory, this flashback, because he's actually going through electric shock therapy. And then we get the tease for the next issue, which is about conversion at Arkham Asylum. Exciting! We see that Alan and Doiby are out at night because Alan's trying to find who the killer was of that guy, because he's still saying that he knows exactly who it was, but he still won't say who it was. And then we go straight into a flashback 4 years earlier where Alan is waking up, or rather being woken up by... I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this. I'm not doing this anymore. I mean, I get it. I know we're in the asylum. We're going for more extreme examples of homosexuality or whatever type of thing this is supposed to be or whatever, but come on now. Brother, sister, Brister, with the full-on Mario mustache and the badly fitted wig. Girl, somebody help my sis. Put her out of her misery, which is foreshadowing. But anyway, this specimen is named Billy, and Billy is letting Alan know that he was shouting Johnny in his sleep again. We see from the journal captions that basically after the whole incident where Johnny drowned, that his commanding officer ended up finding out what it was that was really going on between the two of them, and even though he was expecting to get discharged right then and there, he didn't. He was given the opportunity to come to here, to the asylum, to get himself straightened out. Then there's a quick little joke about a priest because... of course, we get this moment in the journal where Alan is writing down that he's never known anyone like Billy and refers to him as him, but then corrects it and writes her because Billy says her. And I mean, all right, Queen, it's your personal diary. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to try so hard. Billy can't hear your thoughts. And it's while they're here discussing some new procedure that the doctors are talking about, which, hint, hint, it'll be lobotomies. And Billy actually presents this pillowcase that has the gift inside to Alan, and we see that it's actually the classic Green Lantern lantern. And Billy pretty much reveals that he made it while he was in metal shop class because it was pretty much the first piece of scrap that they brought in that wasn't just a gray color. So he says that he just about knocked over the entire class so that he was able to get it, and turned it into this for Alan, saying that he didn't really know why he made it into exactly a train lantern. It just seemed to speak to him. But when Billy catches Alan making eyes at one of the new orderlies, he tells him that he wasn't admiring anything, and he's saying, you really shouldn't torture yourself like this. Like, there's nothing wrong with you. Just, accept who you are and what you are. But he's telling him that no, that part of him is supposed to be dead because he watched, the whole reason why he realized that he was gay die when Johnny died. So, of course, Billy's telling him, like, oh, no, that's not the way that it works. It doesn't just go away when the person dies. But he's telling him, well, what do you know? You're just an old queen who missed his chance at a real life anyway. And he's telling him that he's going to get out of there and he's going to be all fixed up. And when he leaves, he's going to ask the first girl that he sees to marry him. To which Billy says, okay, great. Then when you do that, you can finally get rid of that eyesore of a ring that you've been wearing. But he starts telling him, it's a trophy. Do you even know what it's for? And he says, well, do you? And he tells him that he does. And then he angrily stomps away with his present in hand as, Billy is trying to apologize to him. But the orderlies are coming up and telling him that it's time as they get ready to take him away. So coming back to the present day, we see where Doiby is actually trying to tell Alan that he needs to continue going down memory lane to try and figure out who it is that's committing these murders. And him saying all of that actually reminds Alan of Billy for a second. So he's asking him, what is it that happened? And that takes us back to the flashback. Alan gets woken up in the middle of the night by the lantern because it's glowing and saying, we bring life. But when Alan tries throwing his pillow at Billy thinking that he's the one who's talking, he sees that he's actually not there. And then he actually sees over the next few days that he's not there. And then finally, Billy gets wheeled back into the room, freshly lobotomized and fully vegetized. And when Alan starts questioning, what happened to him, the nurse starts rudely telling him that, he wasn't very receptive to any of the other treatments. So he ended up getting the doctor's new treatment that got right to the trouble that is at the root of his brain. And now he's all cured. He can actually go back to his family and lead a whole new life. So Alan is saying, if his family, they're the ones who locked him away in here. And the whole time that all this is going on, Billy's just kind of sitting there spouting a bunch of gibberish because, the brain isn't exactly known to respond very well when an ice pick has just been driven, through the front of it. So Alan goes running out of the room after realizing that this place isn't actually trying to help people, it's just experimenting on them and basically leaving them broken. So he's kind of having this inner conflict with himself where he's thinking, I'm basically here of my own volition. I can leave whenever I want, right? I don't have to stay here if I don't want to accept all of their treatments. And that's where we see that one of the doctors actually finds him and grabs his journal out of his hand, starts reading it, and is telling him that it's a bunch of disgusting filth. So he has him taken away for, more of the electric shock therapy. But that night, Alan and the other inmates decide that they're just going to go ahead and break out of the facility. So that's what they managed to do. They all managed to break out and go on the run. And then we see that he apparently spent a few years riding the rails and doing some railing. Sorry. And it's during one of these numerous flings where we see the lantern starts lighting up as he's talking about how he had this rivalry with another engineer by the name of Decker. And this whole sequence is actually kind of tying back to the actual first appearance of Alan Scott in the old Golden Age story where he was on the train and then, there's an explosion. The train is destroyed and then Alan ends up getting his powers as a result of that. This is all basically mirroring that, but putting the whole, gay angle into it because of course every significant part of Alan's life is going to now have to be tied into something gay. But in the wake of the explosion we see that Alan is the only one who's able to get up, and he walks over and sees his liaison lying there dead, and then he hears the voice of the Crimson Flame saying again, "We bring death," and he subsequently faints. Then as he's lying there he hears the voice switching to the Emerald Flame saying "Then life," and then again it says "Then power" as he's lifted up off the ground with the lantern floating above him. And that's when we come back over to the present day as Alan is telling Doiby that they had also read stories about the Emerald Flame of Life, which kind of makes me wonder, then did the Crimson Flame have an of something, because it appears to be of death? So was it the Crimson Flame of Death? And if so, why were you going after the Crimson Flame of Death? Oh, that's right, a war. So yeah, why should we go after the Flame of Life? Let's go after the Flame of Death. There's no way that that could possibly end up being something catastrophically bad, right? And then finally Doiby asks the question of saying like, okay, yeah, the guy from before that you said you knew, the bank robber, was that guy connected to this whole train thing? But Alan tells him no, he was actually one of the guys from Arkham. He was the guy who opened the door actually. And of course, they were more than just friends for a little while, but of course, that didn't last very long, and then they were just kind of friends for a long time. And then Alan is floating there saying that every time Alan Scott gets close to someone, a lover, a friend, even an enemy, something or someone takes them from him. Maybe it's because you keep giving them all the clap. But anyway, Alan vows to find whoever is behind this and stop them. And now for issue 3. And if you enjoyed issue 2, oh, you're going to have so much more fun with issue 3. The issue starts out with Doiby again, but this time he's driving his cab and he has this mysterious stranger sitting in the back of his car. And while he's talking to him about butcher shops or something, all of a sudden he sees off to the side Alan is walking and he's in his trench coat, but when he tries to get his attention, he doesn't turn towards him, and Doiby thinks that he probably just didn't see him. So we do come to find out exactly why Alan is here, because he walks up to this guy named Mikey, and when he recognizes him as Scotty, he tells him that he's looking for someone, and he says, "Aren't we all?" Because it appears that Alan has come to the local cruising spot. This is where, in case just by chance you didn't happen to know, back in the day, and it's still something that kind of goes on here and there nowadays, but there's an app for that. There are many apps for that. This is basically a spot where a bunch of like-minded men, a bunch of gay men would all meet up, and you would kind of just hang out in the area, and if someone happened to catch your eye, you might go over and start a conversation, and very quickly that would lead into more, and sometimes it would lead into very temporary I guess Will and Jada would call it a situationship. So just stuff like that. That's basically what this is. It's a hookup spot. That's what he's here for. Historically speaking, I guess it is somewhat accurate when you kind of look at it, that this is where he would have gone to possibly meet up with someone for exactly that purpose. So it does make sense, but seeing it in a superhero comic is not really something that I needed or wanted. And after having seen it, I definitely know that I didn't want it and I didn't need it. So it just kind of leaves me in this weird area where now I'm having to explain this in a video. And the thing is, it's not even really something that other people, like, straight people would need to even necessarily know. So Mikey tells them that they either have to be quick or head over to his place because the Blues are out in force. And when Alan asks him if the activity is more than usual, he says that they say it's for our protection, like they suddenly want to save us. And when he asks them, save us from what, that's when he lets him know that the guy he came here to meet, apparently a guy named Tommy, is actually dead. And he tells them that he knows that they used to see each other a lot, so he's sorry for his loss. And then he also tells them that a couple of other regulars from the piers haven't been around, and people are saying that they probably got scooped or arrested, but in his mind, they've been gone for too long. Then he reveals to Alan that the cause of death was that he drowned, or possibly got caught up with the wrong trick. And right as Alan's about to walk away, he also mentions that he doesn't know where he got the boots that he was wearing when they found him dead, because he never served in the army. So right as Alan's walking away, he said, wait, did you say boots? As he's telling him that they're planning to go and, basically pay their respects, all of a sudden the cops show up and break up the whole scene. But in the chaos, Alan's able to slip on the ring and get away undetected. And he also mentions how these raids are becoming more common, and he's had a few close calls before, but that the law is clear. What's happening out here is criminal, and the police are just out here doing their job. Then we see where he has come over to the morgue to see the body, as he's thinking to himself how Tommy was basically the first gay guy that he met when he came to New York, and then every once in a while they kind of made each other feel safe and alive. Gross. We see the Green Lantern is standing there in the morgue with Flash looking at the body, and Flash is mentioning how the body has burns on the wrists and ankles, and the victim was drowned just like the one that was pulled off of the roof of the bank. Alan also mutters under his breath that it's also like Johnny Ladd, and when Flash hears him, he tells him that if he has more information, he should go and tell the authorities. But Alan's response to that is that they closed the bank case before it was even open. Because both of the victims were gay, that makes them technically criminal deviants, and that investigating their deaths would be a misallocation of resources. Eventually Jay tells him, like, all right, I get it, this one's personal for you. And for some reason Alan decides to go ahead and pull the tough guy routine of, well, what the hell does that mean? If you got something you want to say, then say it. But Jay reminds him of something that Alan once told him, that there is no society without justice for all, so that if no one else is going to investigate what's going on with this, then the JSA will. Alan tries telling him no, he's just going to handle it by himself because he works better alone anyway. But then Jay tells him, oh yeah, actually, you weren't at the meeting, so you didn't know that this came up, but this case has already been assigned, and well, he's already in deep. So he asks him, who is? That's when we actually cut over to Jim Corrigan. He's pursuing this criminal down an alley and using his powers as the Spectre to kind of just keep appearing in different spots to tell him, like, I can be anywhere, you can't run away from me. And then he finally grabs him and tells him, okay, I need some information from you. And right as he's doing that is when Green Lantern actually shows up. Tell him, you could have just asked him for that information instead of doing this whole routine. But he tells him, well, this was faster and it was a little bit fun, as he makes him disappear. Then Green Lantern is surprised to find out that Spectre has actually been basically expecting him, and he tells him that he didn't even know he was coming, but he tells him the eyes of God see all things, and he asks, well, what about your eyes? He says not as much, but he has a way of filling me in on the rest. So he tells him, okay, let me change and then we can go. So they go to the records room of this police station, and Green Lantern is trying to tell him, look, you can go ahead and back off. I have this whole thing covered. And I just have to say, I really hated this particular line of dialogue for the Spectre because it seemed so out of character. He says, when I'm in the outfit, I really need you to call me the Spectre. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but for me, the Spectre is much more commanding in his presence. He doesn't really ask in such a limp-wristed type of way, like the way that it is here, where he's like, I really need you to call me by the Spectre, because it's, that's like my name when I'm in the costume, so like if you could do that. It really just didn't hit right, knowing that this is the manifestation of the wrath of God. It doesn't hit right on the same level, you know what I mean? So that just, And it doesn't really get any better as the issue goes on, honestly. So they start looking for the records for Tommy while Alan's trying to convince him that he works better alone. But then the Spectre asks him, well, if you work better alone, why did you join a Justice Society? But before he can really give an answer, Spectre finds the file that they were looking for, which surprises Alan because he says they couldn't find a file for him over at the 10th precinct. So he was pretty sure they hadn't even opened one. But then the Spectre reveals to him that the guy he just shook down was actually the boyfriend of the file clerk to this particular precinct, and apparently she tells him about every case that crosses her desk, which is just super convenient because he happens to be working for the mob. So he's basically using her for information on what's going on with the police. Unfortunately, when they open the file, it's completely empty. Naturally, Alan climbs right back up on his soapbox and says that the reason for that is because the police really don't want to investigate these deaths or collect any kind of evidence because they just see these victims as disposable, so they prefer to not even waste the resources. But Spectre, who as Jim Corrigan is an actual cop, tells him, no, that's not how it works. I do know how the system works. If we really wanted to bury a file like this, then we just wouldn't create one in the first place. But in this case, there was a report that was generated and a file was created. And the way we know is because the clerk told her boyfriend about it, so it obviously existed. But the fact that it's empty now doesn't necessarily mean that there's a crooked system or a bad cop, just that someone tampered with the file. The first thing Alan thinks is that they're doing that in an attempt to cover up any evidence that would link them to the crime, but then Jim tells him, or they could be trying to make it to where all signs would point to one person, so I think someone might be trying to frame you. But then Alan reminds him that the victims' deaths were also styled after that of his first love, which sent him to an asylum from which he absconded. Then we get some more bad characterization from the Spectre. I'm okay with this first part he says, when he says, it's true you are technically an escaped mental patient, because that is something I conceivably could see the Spectre saying, but when he follows it up with, sorry, I didn't mean for that to sound funny, that's the part where you just completely lost the characterization, because it comes across as he's trying to like be cute or something. I can almost imagine him standing there doing this and shit as he says, sorry, I didn't mean to sound fun. Like, stop, just stop. Then this turns into one of the worst low budget soap operas you could possibly imagine, as Alan stands there saying, this really is about me, isn't it? All these men are dead because of me. And the Spectre says, Alan, you loved them. As he flies away, he says, and look what happened. While I guess the Spectre stands there trying to show some legs so he can hitchhike his way home. But let's be honest, he did not love them. These were hookups. I understand, I know how strong the feelings can seem. I've been there myself back in the days, but that's not what this was. This whole thing about, but you loved them. That was the thing. That's why it's so personal and everything. Just shut up. Shut up. Then it goes back over to Doiby, who's picking up the same mysterious stranger from the beginning of the issue. Then while Alan is standing there looking morose on this rooftop, the Spectre appears behind him and starts giving him this whole pep talk about how even if it's against the law for him to be openly gay, that doesn't mean that he's an evil person who's going to be punished by God and everything. Telling him that he can take his word for it because he's the Spectre and this is very much his department. Then he tells him that he's no more a sinner than anyone and that Johnny's death was not his fault, as Alan stands there looking completely pathetic. And again, with the characterization in this book, especially for Alan, because I realize that this is supposed to be a low point in the story for him where he feels his most vulnerable and everything, even to the point of even seeming depressed. But even with that going on, he just looks, like I said, pathetic. It's like all of the heroic traits of this character that I love have been just stripped away. And it's just going to get worse as we get to the end of the issue. So he goes and gives him a hug and... Look, here's what I want to say. Guys, it's okay to give each other hugs. If your buddy, your like family member, whatever, if it's another guy and you're both straight or whatever the case may be, if you're just both men and he needs a hug because like, you know, his loved one died or his dog died, whatever the case may be, if he's really that broken up, it's okay to give him a hug. There's nothing, you know, suspicious or anything about that. You're just being a human. If that's what was going on in this scene, I could probably be a little bit more forgiving of it. But honestly, this, like, he's just on the horns of a moral, he's just on the horns of a moral dilemma. So it's honestly, it's not that, I don't want to say it's not that deep, but it's not that deep. Like, it really honestly isn't. Like, this whole thing, it's not that catastrophic. Like, his life is not in shambles at the moment. Not really. Like, there's this mystery and everything that's going on, but it's not really known that he's connected to it. So that's why he's trying to handle it all behind the scenes. But it hasn't really gotten to that point. Honestly, I didn't need to see the reassuring hug between two men in a comic, especially not a superhero comic. If this were a different genre of comic, it'd be fine. If it were like horror comic or just some random adventure comic or a slice of life comic, any of those things, fine. In a superhero comic, I don't need that. I really don't. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't fit in a superhero comic. I'm sorry. I'll go ahead and be that person. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Look at this. Look at this. And I'm supposed to enjoy reading this, seeing this. I'm sorry, it doesn't work. But Spectre gives him this whole spiel about how every time he puts on the ring and the cape and goes out there and does, good, that he's actually honoring God and everything. So he actually chooses the light and love over darkness and shame. And he kind of reminds Alan of what Johnny said when he tells him, if God himself didn't want you to love, then how could you? Before telling him that it may surprise him to learn that the Spectre is not actually all that spiritual, which he knows is ironic. He says, and I tell you this so you'll understand, I'm not spouting church doctrine or religious ideology here. Yeah, that's right, you definitely are not. But he basically tells him that this is all real for him, that God is real. He's an actual voice that calls to him. And that kind of spurs something in Alan's memory when he remembers that the Crimson Flame said, first we bring death. The Spectre's explaining that whoever's doing this is someone who knows everything about him, his identity, his past, and even the mission that he was on with Project Crimson, because only someone who was actually there would know about the wounds that Johnny got. The Spectre suggests questioning all 42 officers and crewmen that would have been on the ship at the time, but Alan reminds him it would have just been 41 since Johnny was taken by the Crimson Flame. At that same time, Alan is starting to piece it all together that the flame said death, then life, then power. And when the Spectre's telling him that there's no telling how high this could go, he mentions or to what depths. So the Spectre can tell that he must be very obviously onto something as Alan takes off, because he's going to go and investigate a hunch that he has, and he's really hoping he's not right. And with this shot in mind, I would just like to mention his boots are red. Apparently they were also red in issue 2, but I didn't notice it until I noticed it here, and then I went back and looked, and I saw that they were red in that issue as well. Why did it all of a sudden switch from black to red? Just no explanation given for that. It annoyed me in the first issue, yes, so I'm glad to see it back to red the way that it should be, but what? And as he flies, the Spectre tells him, like, well, whenever you do find who did this, bring him to me. And this is a pretty cool shot, I'm not gonna lie. I like this shot of the Spectre. He looks pretty cool. I would have liked to see his powers actually manifesting, maybe have the cape doing some sort of, like, cool effect, or like his hands glowing or something like that. You know what I mean? Just something that kind of complements the Spectre's look, because this looks cool, but it would look even better if he had like his powers doing something with the cape instead of just being this rooftop background. And that's when we go back over to Doiby, who's mentioning that the guy he was talking about that morning, his friend, actually happens to live on this same block. So when he pulls over, he asks if he wants him to keep the meter running. He says, yes, please, because I'm not finished with you yet. And that's when we see that he walks into Alan's place, and we can see the red lantern ring on his hand as he's looking at Alan's journal. So then Alan comes flying into the room, and here it looks like his boots are green. But then he puts on the pouty face again and says, please look at me, Johnny, and gets backhanded into oblivion. And then Johnny says something in those funny letters that Russians talk in and calls him my love. And that's it for the first 3 issues of Alan Scott Green Lantern. Did you have fun? Because I know I didn't. Look, I hate to be overly negative about things because it dries out my skin, but it honestly feels like there's almost no attempt to actually make this a superhero story. I'm sorry, I really don't feel it. There hasn't been any kind of super heroics really going on. It's been a little bit of a detective story, I guess, but even as a detective story goes, it hasn't really been all that enthralling. Nothing about it has really, grabbed my attention to say this is a really good story. It's just, every time I read more of it, I'm more and more glad that I'm not collecting it, which again makes me really sad because it's Alan Scott, the Green Lantern. I love Alan Scott. I would love to be collecting an Alan Scott series, but this ain't it. This definitely ain't the one. It's not the move, and I'm not going to move towards it. So, I mean, I'm going to end up seeing how the series ends for sure, just to see where exactly this is going. But I sincerely hope that if this does anything at all for the character of Green Lantern, especially Alan Scott, it's just that they will give him another series with a different writer, with someone else who wants to tell a very different story. That's the other thing. I need them to actually let my boy be a hero. Enough of the whole exploring, what was it like being a gay man in the 40s? Who cares? Who cares? I know what that was like. I've actually kind of studied some of that history. And even I don't really care to read this in a comic. You know what I mean? I actually find that topic interesting, but not in a superhero comic. That's not the way that I want it. I don't want ketchup on my ice cream. Just because I happen to like two different things doesn't mean I need them combined together. So this is definitely one of those things. I am not enjoying it, but like I said, if anything comes from this, I just hope there's another Alan Scott series at some point. They give it to someone else and let them tell a different story. Let it actually be a superhero story, because I'm really I want it so bad. I want that type of story. I want an Alan Scott story that's him being just a straight up superhero. None of this, my past lover is back to torment me for some reason. Well, that's just how exes are, Alan. Join the rest of us, okay? But anyway, I think that's about all I have to say for all of this. I don't look forward to doing the editing on all of this, but it's going to be fun, and I will be getting this video out for y'all to watch soon as possible, and I'm going to try to follow that up as soon as possible. I'm trying to get, yeah, life has just become very busy, but that's okay. I'm going to keep it rolling. I'm going to keep it pushing. Anyway, if you've read any of this, feel free to let me know your thoughts. If you haven't read any of this and you're just finding out from me telling you in this video, let me know your thoughts. Whichever way you go, if you liked the video, go ahead and like the video. If you didn't like the video, there is a button for you too. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, and all the regular stuff. I really don't want to go through this whole thing, but I've gone through most of the spiel, so you know how to finish it off. And the way that I'm going to finish this video off is by telling you to go and read a book. Probably not this one, but go and read a book. And if you're not done here, then I'll see you on my next video.